town of Seabrook Island's desires with regard to that parcel have impacted the discussions regarding your urban growth boundary. And I think there needs to be some resolution of that. John, before you go to the UGB, also note that same parcel, the county actually made an offer to the developer to purchase that parcel, which they wanted to, the county's idea, and this was particularly then Councilman, now Chairman, still Councilman, but now Chairman, Joe Boykin, to have a public boat landing at that. So there would be public water access and a boat landing on the southern side of Johns Island, which the only one right now is on the north of the island. That area to the right of us, it's been clear cut now over the last couple of years, was purchased just a year ago by a developer, and it's proposed to put in 34 thereabouts single family homes. It's much to my regret that we didn't learn about that project earlier on and some of the issues with, again, how they were able to remove every single tree in there consistent with the town's ordinances. There was some litigation, there was a settlement with the county. The county, by lack of a better term, capitulated. But I think there has not been much work done recently. I believe that there is some other litigation. There was some other litigation by the neighboring property owners regarding ingress and egress to their properties. They think
that's Resurrection Road.
Yes, that's the extension of Resurrection Road.
And so it'd be on septic, right?
That's all would be on septic. Yes. You know, again, there is planned and approved to go in 30-some homes there, but again, it may be tied up in litigation right now. A little bit further up, there was the planned Island Park Place development. Those two properties, adjacent properties, have now been sold. I'm not sure, I know who the buyer is. I'm not sure it's been made a matter of public record, so I'm not sure that's reflected in the county records, and until it is, I'm not going to comment further on who that new owner is. Okay, John, anything else you wanted to show around there?
No, what I was going to do is talk a little bit about the urban growth boundary as we were discussing that particular section.
Okay, since we're still over here, we'll get back to what's developable on Kiawah Island here in a minute, but we'll focus on the urban growth boundary right now.
Excuse me.
This parcel that you're talking about.
You see highlighted here in the yellow band
Yes, okay.
is the urban growth boundary. We've been currently in discussions with the Charleston County staff, Town of Seabrook planning staff, on developing an intergovernmental agreement that would really begin to solidify the urban growth boundary and its intended purpose. The challenge, I think.
Would you orient us here? I don't know.
Yes. So I'll zoom in just a little bit closer here.
That's the town hall area.
So here's Freshfields Village. Here we are at Town Hall.
Okay.
So the urban growth boundary essentially runs down Betsy Carrison Parkway and to the, I'll put her in the zoning later so you'll see what I'm really trying to illustrate here, the challenge as we engage with the other municipalities. To the east, is located within the urban growth boundary. So everything in yellow and blue, the municipalities, Seabrook and Kiawah, are located within the urban growth boundary. To the west, the area, the AGR zone properties, those are located outside the urban growth boundary.
And John, what's the R4 means? 4 single family units per acre.
Correct.
By right, and AGR is one
Right, one for AGR.
Yeah, and there's some areas that are AG8, I think.
None none on this southern side of the island. Majority AG8 probably are a little bit central to the island.
So back to the yacht club, that's AGR, right?
It's AGR, so it would require, if it were developed under Charleston County, what was proposed would have to be an upzoning. And upzonings, you know, there's been a lot of pushback on upzonings. That's one reason why Seabrook, if they deal would annex it, they could zone it however they want to.
The unique thing about that, I don't know if we need to get into that discussion. Seabrook just adopted a new ordinance that, to the effect, I know they always could go against that wish, but to the effect that any future annex properties that would be outside of the urban growth boundary would be consistent with whether that original designation would, so it would closely align with the zoning standards of AGR, hypothetically, if they were to.
Right.
So I know that's something that they've recently passed. Whether or not that stands with any future negotiations, something that to be looked at.
John, just so I'm clear, if Seabrook annexed any, what you said is if Seabrook annexed anything, the current zoning would stay the same?
They would try to find standards within their zoning development codes that would be applicable or closely to what the current zoning is within the county.
And John, what's the urban growth boundary mean?
So it's a designated line that Charleston County set out that determines essentially urban from rural. And so it's a planning tool that's used to really centralize development where infrastructure is located. So most times within the urban growth boundary, you see roads and sewer, those types of really heavy duty infrastructure that where development should go.
Which is why I asked, because there's no sewer, there's no roads.
Well, this was predicated primarily on the two municipalities. So if you were to zoom out this map here and look at where the urban growth boundary is, it really does not include most of Johns Island. It really circles the beach community and then jogs back down to the peninsula. So the only portions of the urban growth boundary on Johns Island are those of Maybank Highway down the center core. And so it really is sort of the concentrated areas of development.
And this is what John Slogar mentioned yesterday. He said you can actually, you can see, even if you didn't see the yellow, the urban growth boundary, you could recognize effectively where it is because there's a lot more dense development inside the urban growth boundary than there is outside of it.
It seems like it's the exact opposite of what it should be, though, except for Maybank. I mean, we don't want.
Well, I actually had that conversation. The question is why are we inside the urban growth
Exactly.
boundary? For Kiawah Island itself, I guess, and Seabrook Island itself, but the county's mindset at the time, I guess, was to encourage more dense development in this entire area that is now within the urban growth boundary. All this Andel tract properties and Kiawah River up to where the Island Park Place development was going to be. And that's a question I posed to the chairman, and I said, actually, rather than just reinforcing urban growth boundary, can we retrench it?
Yes.
And he was reluctant to go down that path of kind of opening up a can of worms about adjustments of the urban growth boundary. And I understand that, I guess. But the problem is that, and we first encountered this with the Island Park Place development, which is just inside the very corner. John, can you kind of zoom in on the Island Park Place development, which is the very top end of the urban growth boundary? So, it's actually, it's inside, yeah. Yeah. So it's those two parcels right there. And when you recall, when that was first proposed, Jenny Honeycutt was kind of supportive of the development. And her argument then was, even though it's zoned R4, and that was going to be substantial upzoning, well, it's inside the urban growth boundary. The intention is for there to be more intense development. inside the urban growth boundary. So that's the problem with these areas being inside the urban growth boundary, is this mindset or bias on the part of some council members, and particularly those that don't necessarily focus on this area, but thinking about other areas of the county, that these are ripe for upzoning.
Yes, therein lies one of the opportunities, I think, in the discussion regarding this urban growth. There's IGA between the towns, Seabrook and Kiawah, and the county, and the conversations that we've had today, in which we have, I think, staff support, and I think if we can get all of the municipalities, councils to buy in, is to be able to look at this line where in other areas of the county, you may naturally have urban sort of development on both sides of this line. So close, but we would like to see how this can be transitioned or stepped down, so you naturally have a graded or transect of development, opposed to it being densely urban on one side and rural on the opposite side.
And I was waiting for you to get to this point. And I remember when you had Joe Boykin and Jenny come to talk to us about that development, that health and wellness thing.
Yep.
And Joe's words were different, as I recall them, than what this says. He was talking about how stuff like that needs to be in the Maybank corridor because that's designed as the urban growth corridor, which is properly in the map, but there was really no discussion about it extending all the way down here when they were talking to that.
Extending what all the way down?
The urban growth boundary.
The urban growth boundary is right along here. The rest of Johns Island up to Maybank is almost all outside the urban growth boundary.
Yeah, I would agree with the sentiments. I mean, the idea is that you want more dense development concentrated up on Maybank,
Yeah.
where more of the traffic and access can get there.
Exactly. But I question, though, our strategic interests and the definition of urban growth boundary. I mean, we can't get sewer here. That health and wellness village was going to be on septic. It's counter to the definition of urban growth.
I think that's the idea, that then you can begin to put additional measures regarding zoning standards. So the density of R4 is relatively not dense when you look at all the other categories in the county's definition of zoning standards, right? The least restrictive, of course, the AGR. We think even more restrictive in more rural areas, the Vettisville water law. But in R4, it's 4 units per acre. To the county, that is sort of less than medium, if you will, of density-wise. So for us, that may be an excessive. So it's really trying to find an agreement between the municipalities of what's appropriate for this area.
And that's what, I mean, my thinking is, and we've talked about this with the land bank and stuff like that, is I think our interests are protecting the Kiawah and our what's the right term? Our buffer area or whatever, the area that.
Well, that's why I just use the term Kiawah watershed, but there is this buffer area.
We want to keep it as close to how it is now because of traffic, because of environment, because of resilience, because of all those things. And so having all that, I just think this is really counter to our strategic interests that this is designated this way.
Well, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that other than advocate, as John has, not only for at least no expansion of the urban growth boundary, plus John will talk about a potential overlay along Betsy Carson. But just before we do that, I do want to focus the 2 parcels that were the Island Park Place. So again, those were zoned R4, but those were the 2 where there was going to be proposed to be a commercial development that was 2/3 the size of Freshfields. That was a long battle and narrowly lost to county council, even though it was unanimously opposed by the county planning staff. So Stephanie did confirm it now is a matter of public record. So the developer, which was people are maybe familiar with kind of on island property, individuals. The Conservancy made an offer for those 2 parcels, and it's directly across the street from the area they've already acquired, directly across the street where they're going to have their nature trails and everything. That land has now been purchased by, and again, it's a matter of public record,
you can click it, Kiawah.
an affiliate of the resort.
Yeah.
It's
Kiawah.
been purchased by who?
So the resort.
Riverstone, or
The resort.
Kiawah Island Golf Resort, but they're probably Riverstone.
Well, I think it's the resort.
The resort.
Yeah.
It's all the same
It's all the
family.
same.
It's all the same family, but I mean, it's kind of more the resort side than the developments.
And what's the acreage of those two lots?
17 acres, I think, between
Yeah,
the.
one's 8.5, the other's 9.5.
Well, one would question if the resort just purchased it, they're not gonna let it sit, they're going to
That's their
develop it.
intention. Yeah.
Well, the resort or affiliated interest own 400 or 500 acres around here that have just been sitting
I
for a long
understand,
time.
but why-
Yes. So again, my belief is that those two parcels are potentially connected with the publicly stated desire to build another golf course. And that is a plan. It's not very far along at this point in time, but another golf course, relocating the clubhouse, and I believe a publicly stated desire to potentially site some employee housing.
Yeah, the employee housing was my anticipated answer.
Well, there is still, they do have, right along the south side there, you do have the one to see, you've got a couple of holes. That's the 17.
Yeah, I
and
know, but you have homes, and it could be for we shouldn't conjecture, but it could be for the golf course. I was expecting to be for worker housing.
Well, and it may be, and they may not have specific plans for that yet.
Well, then why spend the
He
money?
may know.
Then why spend the money?
Because
Because
they like to buy land.
they
if
like
need
that.
it.
Let Mark.
John, can you pull the map down?
That's the two parcels that you're pointing out. If you go further north, I think they have holdings up there.
Yeah, they do.
They do.
Yes.
They're part of the idea of expanding golf.
Yes.
Not those, not the others.
See the big parcel right there that John's got his arrow
That
on?
one.
That's the resort-owned property where they're talking about
I thought it was
expanding.
pretty public knowledge what the resort's plans were about that.
Yeah.
It was going to be the addition of an executive course, a 9-hole course.
That's right there, that big
Right,
piece right
and the
there.
movement of the clubhouse.
No, it would be not,
mean, that's public knowledge, isn't
the.
I didn't know that,
The
but-
plan is both for new 18-hole golf course as well as an executive course.
Parcels 60 and
A
65.
new 18-hole plus oak
Yeah.
plus a 9-hole.
I believe that is kind of the long-term goal or vision. What we've learned is that the family, and this is decisions made by Richmond, they're not really made locally. I think that's fair to say, Mark, that things don't move quickly. But this one instance, they had an opportunity to acquire property that was adjacent to them. It gives them additional flexibility with regard to housing, or even if they wanted to make any modifications to those two holes on the existing golf course.
I think with people like them, there's an art and a science to these
Yeah.
purchases.
But
and I guess
anyway.
I'd rather have a well-designed golf course than a shopping center.
Well, what we do know now is the resort there are no current plans to, they don't have plans ready to submit to the county to develop those two parcels. There's still, my understanding is it's going to be a while yet before, and this will get to other on-island development stuff before you get to the golf course expansion, and who knows about employee housing. But the bottom line is those two parcels, which are inside the urban growth boundary and zoned R4 that we were trying to be upzoned, are now off the market. Those were, ideally, those would have been acquired by the Conservancy and preserved. The Conservancy is looking at other things. And that's why the question is if there are other opportunities for the town to contribute to creating this buffer, that I think we should consider those. Each one's going to be, very fact-based. So, but that's kind of where we are around the immediate area.
We're going to talk about that more this afternoon, right?
Yep.
Okay.
For Correct. You highlighted one thing, Mr. Mayor, regarding the discussions with the county, town of Seabrook on intergovernmental agreement, and that's discussion of sort of an overlay zoning district for Betsy Carson. And that's one of the goals that we've tried to discuss is how do you keep this corridor as naturally as it is today from an appearance or development standpoint, whether it requires additional buffers to step any future development away from Betsy Carson, setbacks, or even looking, we haven't got that far yet of looking at particular uses. We have had conversations of ensuring that any future intense development should be, when I say intense, think scales of intensity, like commercial development concentrated where it is today at the intersection of River Road, Betsy Carson, Bohicket Road, and then as today, our commercial node in Freshman Village. So that's the current thinking there, and I think the support, or at least the questions that I asked members of the council is how can we continue to put resources in to create a greater buffer along the Betsy Carson corridor. More importantly, I think trying to ensure that the messaging is not just buffering Kiawah from Johns Island, but more so aligning the development goals of what Lower Johns Island is and Kiawah. That way, I think we can get a more bang for the buck.
Yeah, and then I fell in the trap of using kind of buffering as well, but we need to be careful in that regard. Kind of to the idea of protecting these kind of mutual interest and objectives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maintaining the rural character of Johns Island.
John, is that area where it says Jack Island Drive and Drift, that's Kiawah River?
That's Kiawah River.
Yeah, this is Kiawah River, and I think the total homes was 1,200.
1,200 or so
there
are.
with the Dunlin. It's inside the urban growth boundary. I think that was one of the reasons why that level of intensity there.
Goes,
Thank you.
goes over to. It's
Can you-
outside, Kiawah River is also outside the urban.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of the entranceway outside, but majority of where the development is located inside.
To the east, right there, John, there's
There's still some tracks here.
subdivision area.
So John, can you highlight where the current clubhouse is on Oak Point?
It's
For
right there.
orientation purposes?
Just to the right. Drop down.
Oh, there it is.
So, no, you can't see it yet.
No, but I know geographically
Yeah.
where I am.
So what's interesting, I mean, it's hard to kind of visualize where we are now, but we're in a direct line with the clubhouse, and it's actually only about,
Yeah, it's not far.
I mean, it's less than half a mile
It's not far.
right down the road, down the water, down the Hulliver Creek.
John, can you say again, so what's the objective of the IGA?
So I probably should have started, this has been something I think the planning staffs have been working on for quite some time. It's just, I think the momentum of the elected officials have not been aligned, and I think with Joe Boykin coming on as chair of the county council, the idea is to really ensure that the urban growth boundary is the most powerful tool from the county's perspective in how growth can be managed. And so with the municipalities being able to support that initiative is the way that we can essentially concentrate development as a region in the areas that it should go, as opposed to continue to sprawl out in different areas.
But I guess after we've been discussing, or at least I've been saying that we want to not have urban growth right on our doorstep. Does promoting using the IGA counter, or is there some way to work in some management?
I agree with you. I think locally Kiawah does not want to see any additional growth in what I would say the front door, front porch of Kiawah.
Inside the urban growth boundary, all around us, ideally.
But I think to be a regional partner, we would have to layer all of the different tools together to accomplish that. And so whether it be through conservation and those types of efforts, the county being one of the drivers, being a big player in this, are utilizing this particular model of us engaging with Seabrook in the town of Kiawah to be able to challenge the other municipalities as well to say, if we can agree as a region, this is where we see our growth happening, then it would be difficult for any developer to kind of jurisdiction shop and allow them to go from one municipality when they're just across the road or across a few parcels down the way. And so it really is more of a regional alignment thinking to be able to get on the same page as a region.
Pressures are going to be, what one trying to protect, the pressures are to go across and develop to shrink the urban growth boundary, just like Seabrook is thinking about this little corner, but there's all these other pockets. You see all this development right along the urban growth boundary. There's going to be pressure on county council to allow development on the inside of, or the outside of the urban growth boundary of existing rural areas. So the idea is to try to lock in a multi-jurisdictional agreement that you can't make any adjustments to the UGB unless all of the parties agree to. Now, it's challenging because you can't bind future councils, but if you set up a mechanism, you can make it much more difficult. To address your point, which I agree with and I'm concerned about, there's just not going to be the ability to support to shrink the urban growth boundary. So we're kind of stuck being inside the urban area of the urban growth boundary. What we need to do, there's no prospect, I don't believe, of getting county councils to start down zoning all these parcels. What our tool sets are, one, advocacy, working with the county to make sure there's no upzoning of any of these, as was proposed with the Island Park Place development at the very least, and then work with conservation partners and others to see if there's opportunities to take some of these parcels out of the development game altogether.
Gotcha. Okay, so kind of the idea is pick our battles and pick the terrain we're battling on, and be at the table.
I'll give you one tangible example that has worked so far. If you know where the airport is on Johns Island, it's a huge tract that was just put under conservation. The pressures that have been presented of future developments that's circling around the Johns Island airport and adjacent to River Road that are now expanding from Maybank going south, having a band essentially that, when I mean a band of undeveloped lands that's protected in perpetuity, but allow now that development to transition. I think it was kind of highlighted yesterday during some of the discussion of being able to transition from urban core, where Johns Island, the majority of Johns Island remains in a rural sort of state, if you will, relatively to urban core of like Maybank Highway.
The other thing we have to appreciate is our incentives and interests are very different than the county's. The county's interest and incentives are to grow, to generate new tax revenues, and jobs for county residents. So development is generally viewed as a good thing. You hope it'll be smart development. One of the things there's been a fair amount of pushback on a lot of ways is an increasing recognition that development for development's sake creates its own set of problems and all these choke points, particularly the infrastructure to support it. And that requires a lot of dollars as well. So make sure that you have in place this whole concept of concurrency, that before you approve any new developments, certainly before you do any upzoning, that you have the necessary roads infrastructure, amenities infrastructure, in place. And that's when that's what Jim McBride particularly has been very focused on from the part of Johns Island within the city of Charleston.
Thanks.
So when you say that, I hear you, and that growth is a good thing in the county. But that seems to be, from my experience, is driven from the top down, not the bottom up. It's not the populace saying, hey, we want more growth. And I think about our planning commission. When I was on planning commission, we were absolutely not pro-growth. So it was more maintain what we have and smart development, but maintain the rural character. And I guess my question is, does it make sense for us to try and change that mentality with the county? Because it seems like it's a leadership, if you got everybody in the county say, growth doesn't benefit me, you might be able to change the leadership or have the leadership change.
Well,
You understand what I'm asking?
one real world politic issue is, look at where these are partisan elections in the county. They are contested elections. Take a look at where the contributions are coming from. That's matters of public record.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, and so that's an added factor. Just look at the Island Park Place development. It was unanimously opposed by the planning staff, unanimously opposed by the planning commission, but it was at the knife's edge to get it was potentially a 5-4 vote in favor of that, notwithstanding that, because of all these other interests. Hiring good lobbyists that had good relationships.
I understand history. I guess mine's more, maybe it's a rhetorical question, but you think about people up along Betsy Carrison, further up along Bohicket. They've got signs out, no development, we don't want to be Kiawah's driveway. I don't know if there's a way to have a grassroots program to talk about this with individuals.
Well, they do. That's why Joe Boykin himself is very supportive of that. But he's deep.
But what can we do to affect the grassroots or affect that change in mentality of the populace, such that the leadership changes?
Well, that's what we've been. That's part of what we've been doing. That's why I spent so much time with the Johns Island Task Force and Johns Island Council to try to build those relationships, help our advocacy to support that. But again, got to understand that that's one slice of the county. The county is North Charleston, it's Georgetown, it's whole other areas where the pressures are just very, very, and interests are very, very different.
And the approach that we've taken here is a very Kiawah-centric approach. This is all people who are 60 years old and older and are established. We're not building families and we're not looking for new homes. And we're interested in the status quo being maintained. If I was 30 years old and starting my career and having a family, etc., my desire for growth would be radically different from that perspective than it is from the perspective I'm sitting at right now. So
You'll be looking at jobs.
Pardon?
You'd just be thinking about jobs.
I think
you're
that's a
30.
good point. I agree with what you're saying. But what I observe is driving into Charleston, driving to the airport, it takes about 20 minutes longer to drive to the airport than it did 2 years ago. All those people that are moving here are still commuting. They don't realize that they're aligning themselves to a long commute to work.
So there are now belatedly more and more conversations about that, and that's what a lot was animating the how you allocate the TST tax and everything. So, I mean, there was a greater appreciation of this amongst the COG, amongst the individual municipalities and the county as well. We're trying to do our part. We've been trying to do our part. Part of the message here is we need to continue to engage to even a greater degree than we
I'll
have.
give you one example, Councilman Farrell. When I talk about alignment in the messaging, for a good amount of time, the I guess directions of how Kiawah engaged with transportation projects on Johns Island were vastly different than what majority of Johns Island or other parts of the region were. And I think now where you have I'm using the word momentum, because the task force has been around for a very long time, but within the last 3 to 5 years is when they've really begun, I think, to be effective in engaging with Charleston County because of the alignment of different stakeholders. And I think Kiawah becoming a participant or ally in that, based on, of course, our interests, helps that narrative. The Cross Island Parkway was one of those, right? Which was no one supported that but Kiawah. That was just one example of a transportation initiative. But if there can just be some synergy and alignment from top down between the stakeholders in the area, I think the council, meaning county council, begin, I think, move a little more swiftly. and swiftly being very relative.
And Luke, part of that, I mean, again, it's an intentionality in terms of the engagement, greater engagement. That's why they have these collaboration of councils, and I have my sit down with Mayor Cogswell in a couple of weeks. And but it's also the messaging, how we talk about our shared interest rather than Kiawah's.
Do we have written messaging that we could all reference when we're talking about stuff?
We don't.
Yeah.
We should. I mean, it's a
We,
good.
we can talk about, I try to be careful about how I discuss those things. I, push back when Johns Island Council meetings and/or Johns Island Task Force meetings about this whole kind of narrative, not Kiawah's driveway, et cetera, and talk about how we are engaging. And in things like getting more messaging out about our charitable grants program for the Sea Islands community helps in that regard. When we talk about our shared interest in maintaining the rural character for heritage purposes, for environmental purposes, to manage growth, and we talk about, gee, we're potentially interested in helping. It doesn't have to be on Kiawah Island, but our own Greenbelt Fund to take it to participate with the state, with the county on preserving property. All of that helps.
Yeah.
With that messaging, it begins to resonate.
So with what John's laying out, that makes me even more concerned about building things down here like in Andell and in those places that will attract people to come down to this part of the island. I was thinking just the developments I'm seeing up on Maybank, but with the potential of development within the area you're talking about, within this boundary, that's even more people that are going to want to come down and be congestion on the roads.
I think it's actually kind of, it could be just the opposite, because right now there's a lot of people going up to Maybank, and maybe they.
Yeah, I see it in reverse. It all depends on what the base zoning districts are and the zoning standards that would allow it. All of this that's in this area, Kiawah River is probably the most intense based on the allowed uses. R4 would allow residential. I mean, and there's a handful of community commercial that were sort of non-conforming or been since its existence, but the majority of everything that's inside the urban growth boundary down this way, it really is R4 as far as undeveloped lands. And so I think moving forward, we can, as Kiawah, I think, introduce to having that be the standard, or because I don't think there'll be appetite from the county to downzone that, but I think additional layers, like I said, buffering, ensuring that it doesn't, have any more upzoning in this particular zone would be the way to go.
We don't want like Jenny Honeycutt's early comments about being open to upzoning.
Early on, I think she came around, but it took a lot of work, but she came around and ended up being supportive of the position. So anyway, that's kind of.
I just want to say, so I agree with everything you're saying. I think I may be at a wait and see. I'm going to use me as an example. I used to go to Roper for my doctor. I just transferred to MUSC because there's a service now here. So it took me off the road going up.
It did, in that case, yes.
So
I think
I'm not sure if it's going to be a magnet.
I think a grocery store will be.
So the issue is, where does it pull from? I mean, remember, you also have these places have to be staffed. And you do the traffic analysis to know the net impact. But, Seafields has how many, 30, 40 staff?
Oh, yeah.
That now have to come down here every day. They don't live here. MUSC staff don't live here. They're coming down here. Freshfields has 350 some employees. They're coming down.
Actually, my doctor lives in Seafields, Seabrook.
Okay. Well, some may, but not all the staff does. So, yes, you do take the pressure off. So the question is, what's the right balance
Yeah,
of
it's
service?
a balance. It definitely is a balance.
Yeah.
It definitely is a balance.
So I might be changing my thinking on some of these things, but for me, I guess my priority would be, like Kiawah River is an example. I'm going to throw this out there as an example of good development. It's concentrated, but it's well off of Betsy Carrison. So you've got that visual buffer, kind of the rural
Yeah.
visual as you're driving in.
Yeah.
And to the extent that there's growth and it's off, you don't see it, that's fine. And maybe that incents or provides a reason for having better corridor transportation. And so if we think about that as being a healthy thing, I get concerned when the Sea Island Conservancy focuses like a lot of its resources close to us. That means it's Kiawah-centric, where if they and we are focused further out into the county and protecting that corridor and pushing development out into the edges so that you maintain those visual corridors and demanded better corridors for transportation.
Well, if you've been to the Sea Islands Conservancy's presentation, what underpins.
Well, don't get lost in the detail. What I'm saying is the corridors need to be preserved visually, and then the transportation through those corridors need to be enhanced. And that allows for development in the wings. So how do we think about protecting those corridors, allowing for the development, and then demanding for better transportation through the corridor?
Well, protecting the corridors is part of what for example, the Betsy Carrison overlay idea is all about. That's a classic example of that. The Conservancy is looking at acquiring properties, keep Betsy beautiful, and they've actually made offers on others that have come on to the market, looking about protecting the corridor. The Low Country Land Trust, when we had Matt Williams, yes, come, they've got a slightly different strategy. Their desire is they focus on just large tracts to preserve, to increase. They want to get to Johns Island's 9.5% preserved right now. Waddenlaw's 30+%, to get to 30% on Johns Island, and all kind of these barrier islands and sea islands. So they just say apart from protecting the corridor, they'd say actually no more 1,200 unit developments, because Johns Island overall infrastructure can't support that, regardless of how buffered or well set off they are and how attractive they are.
I think they're going to come this afternoon when we're having that discussion, if we have any questions for them.
So should we, is that kind of enough here? Should we transition on to?
Yeah, I think that.
Can I just, I agree with you, Luke. I think that when we get to the discussion of where do we do strategic investment, that's probably a consideration. Just like the Conservancy, Low Country Land Trust has that grant easement program where the property owner retains their property, but they buy the development rights and then put it into conservation easement, which is a more affordable way for a lot of players to do that. Maybe we decide that part of our strategic intention is to not just invest within the Kiawah ecosystem, but other places. I don't know. I mean, we probably need to think that.
I don't have an answer either, but I'm thinking about, I think a lot of times, at least the perception is, my guess is, Kiawah is doing things for Kiawah. And if we talk about the messaging, if we start to change our approach and thought process and messaging such that we're doing things for Johns Island, we get some benefit, but we're really trying to affect the whole island, whether it's the regional partnerships or the outreach we do or our charitable and conservation efforts. It becomes less about Kiawah doing stuff for Kiawah and more about Kiawah doing stuff for Johns Island.
So in that regard, I was saying, I'm a quarter jestingly, half jestingly, and I had these conversations in other contexts. Took a long time for the county and the city to identify the final $7.5 million to construct the second lane off of Johns Island on Maybank. I kind of said, well, you could have come to us and we could have either written a check or at least loaned you the money if that could have accelerated the project by a year or two. And I mean, we just have a different capability than they do. And again, it's a kind of a silly example in some respects, but that's an area where we actually could have accelerated. you uniquely could have accelerated that project by a year or two.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have agreed with you.
Yes, I'm not.
But I hear what you're saying. I hear your intent. How do we
The idea.
accelerate, how do we leverage whatever
Yeah.
and accelerate
Yeah.
things that are conservation and the.
I'm not saying saving the 15 or 20 minutes is, they would say that may be a little too attenuated, but it's the
I
kind.
think Jim McBride's looking for a check last Thursday.
And then if you're really throwing that Harris Teeter into that mix, it's horrifying.
Well, what's more horrifying is that they'll show additional right around the pockets around that, not just the Harris Teeter, there's going to be new residential development. There's another new infill just off River Road, just north of the intersection. And that's one of McBride's frustrations in trying to change the county's or city's review standards, because their traffic analysis is just what's happening literally right outside the new infill development, and not its cumulative impact on, half a mile away on an F* intersection.
Yeah, if you build it, they will come. Get a new Harris Teeter there at Maybank and River, they will come.
Anyway, all right. Okay, shifting
In a helicopter.
east. Okay, this is the east half of the island. So color is all of areas still to be developed or developable. Purple are, I believe, single-family or residential parcels, and the whatever that burnt orange, whatever color that is the commercial. Almost all of those, most of those, are the resort, with the exception of Upper Beachwalker. Is that correct, John?
Correct.
So anyway, and it'll get a little more dramatic as you kind of move further east, but there's a fair amount of development occurred. Still, there's a lot of purple there.
Yeah.
And this kind of gets to the Kiawah next number. So just in terms of overall kind of future volume on top of our existing infrastructure constraints, we're going to have continued development. So, we talked about the 2,500, vehicles that come on island between 6:45 and 10 a.m. every morning. And that's employees on shifts, but it's also all the contractors and service providers. So, we're at about 4,100 dwelling units with certificates of occupancy on the island right now. It's still a little more than 4,100. Joanne, I don't remember exactly what it is in the Kiawah next. We could pull that up. 4,100 or so. Entitlements go up to about 5,200 or 5,300. We're not really going to get that many, but you're looking at about 100 new homes under construction right now. Have plus or minus, that don't have certificates of occupancy, new builds. Then there are, pardon?
All single families.
Those are single family, well, yes, there were single family builds. We also have Ocean Pines, which is another 80, which is in process. And then we have about 300 single family parcels, undeveloped, developable single family parcels yet to come. And then we have, the Upper Beachwalker and certainly the resort properties, which have entitlements under the development agreement, and those are all reflected in there. So we are, I think realistically, we're looking at, we've worked through this, like 4,800, 4,900, not 5,200, likely future dwelling units on the island. That's a 20% increase
How do you,
over where we are right now.
where are you accounting for redevelopment? Like, there's 3 or 4 houses in my neighborhood that are totally gutted.
So that's completely separate. I'm just talking about new development, just in terms of additional, bodies, additional traffic associated with that new development. Then yes, there's going to be continued redevelopment. You've got it in Inlet Cove, you've got it around a Duneside area, you've got a tremendous amount of redevelopment occurring on Eugenia.
Sparrow
So
Pond.
how many
Oh
new,
my God, Eugene.
how many lots for residential homes, did you say?
About 300. There's still, again, I just, making, people kind of, again, say we're at the end stage of development. And I'm saying we're in the latter stage, but when you still have 20% growth, you're not at the end.
Yeah, I'm just trying to picture that on my mind. I know there's a lot out at Ocean Park, but 300,
Go back.
Yeah,
go
well,
back to
just
the map.
look at that map, go back to
Yeah,
the
I
map.
know, yeah, but some of the, there are some large, well, that's right, it doesn't matter.
I say yesterday, I
But
was
part
stunned
of that
by
is to
15.
show visually that, wow, there's actually a lot more out there than people
Yeah,
think.
the big groupings of purple means like there's 4 or 5 undeveloped lots right next to each other. And I can't imagine like going down on Flyway, I go past there all the time. I don't remember seeing that large amount of undeveloped land.
Yeah. I mean, think about, I mean, my street alone has 2 lots. Out of 14 lots, there's 2 that are undeveloped. So that's kind of, that's a good average for the whole island.
Yes, yes.
While this map is up, I was going to mention, you see that large purple area at the west end of Ocean Park?
Yep.
That's a misrepresentation.
Is it?
Oh, I wondered about that.
That's a very tiny, no,
The one
The
next to
other
it,
one.
the other one.
right there.
It's 1 lot.
That's a tiny little peninsula.
Yeah,
It's not that large an area.
Is it buildable, Mark?
yeah.
Pardon me?
Buildable?
Yeah, there's probably 2 or 3. It's owned by, it's one of the royal parcels. It's owned by another entity now, and they consider it 1 or 2.
So
It's
maybe
not
the
that
visual on that one's off, but it's still, there are homes that can be built there.
No, I'm
Yeah, yeah,
just
okay.
suggesting that to update the expression of it, isn't it?
It's being built, it's a Darby or it's a developer's son or grandson, I think, who owns it.
I'm sorry?
He
It's
said
a
it's one
developer's
of the royal
son or
parcels.
grandson. I think it's a Darby property that's being built there now.
No, it's owned by someone out of Charlotte.
So Mark, I'm sorry.
If what you're asking about is Captain Maynard's, which is at the upper left.
Upper left, yeah, that's 2, those are 2 parcels that are on the market right
There can
now.
only be 2 home sites.
Yeah, well, they were trying to do 4.
I know, but I'm just saying.
It's now 2, yeah, and those are on the market for $15 and $20 million each, just
Yeah, they
the
are.
land.
Yeah.
We should all go in.
So Mark, at the ocean course, there's 2 parcels in red. Do you have any idea what will go there?
Well, so the larger of the 2 is an island that's attached by a bridge out there.
Willett Island, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Willett Island, yeah.
Yeah, and that allows for upper teens or whatever, but this is a good example of probable versus
Yeah,
possible.
yeah.
What's more probable is something more modest in terms of count, but they don't have anything that they're planning. They're
But
not
that's red though, so what would the resort put there?
cottages.
Cottages?
Yeah, but they have no plans. It's like what you shared earlier.
You know, we talked about this a little bit. I understand what you're saying. But, you know, if there's a change of ownership for the resort, which is potentially going to happen, their intentions may change.
The timing, everything could change, we don't know. So, but to Mark's point, I mean, that's why the number that's represented by entitlements, 5,200 plus, is not realistic to be developed anytime soon. What is realistic to be developed is, and you can kind of add up the numbers, is the 300 single family. You add to that the 80 at Ocean Pines. You add that to the entitlements under the mediated settlement agreement, or what may be modified at Upper Beachwalker, and then you're assuming that some of the resort properties will be developed. East Beach will be developed at some point with some number of townhomes in addition to potential extension. That's kind of where you get to that, 15 to 20% increase over where we are now. Is there entitlements for more? Yes, most of those for a number of reasons, many of those for a number of reasons may not happen. Is that all fair, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. The other little orange, if I could comment.
Sure.
The other little orange area is where if I'm not mistaken,
That's utility.
this. Yeah, that's the utility company, Kiawah Utility. What you typically use in modeling for our community type of how many lots are built on in a given year, you usually use 5 to 10% of the lots available for being built on will be built on. So if let's say it's 300 modeling purposes, that would give, and that tracks pretty closely to ARB submittals, that it's somewhere in that zone, for what it's worth.
A quick assessment of projection based on a 40 number out like 40 per year based on the permits that we were tracking. That would push us out 5, 6, 7 years, just based on how quickly those cycles become.
John, I can hardly hear you.
So thinking about how long we would reach that end stage of official quote-unquote end stage development, if you would average our permits of about 40 houses being submitted a year, using that projection across that 300, that would take us out to 5 to 7 years, based on a year and a half build, 18 months.
Well,
But
and
it's
it may be
not
longer than
300.
that because the largest property owner that has the most developable property is the resort, and whether the resort develops within the time frame of a new development agreement or not is uncertain. A lot depends on what happens with the future of the family and ownership associated with that. I think it's not telling any tales out of school, but the only evolved set of plans right now with regard to the resort properties or with regard to West Beach. Is that there?
Yes.
Okay. And so, nothing concrete with regard to East Beach at this point in time or other properties that they own.
Lower on the list. Lower on the list.
Yes, lower on the list, yeah. So.
Is there I'm just curious, is there a thought of submitting something for West Beach?
I think that's the hope.
Yeah, they don't do anything fast,
No, I do think that's the hope. I know this for a fact, they've done a considerable amount of work of sufficient detail that it's appropriate for.
I think it's fully the town's expectation, the planning department's expectation that there will be plans with regard to West Beach that will be presented. But nothing else is on the near horizon.
When you say West Beach, you're specifically talking about beach.
Across from Cougar Clubhouse.
Old, this,
Old end site.
where the old Sweetgrass? where
The
that-
old end site.
Yeah, the old end site,
Right across from the Cougar Clubhouse, the big empty lot.
where the conference center is at, diagonal from the conference center.
That would be an example of the thought that you mentioned earlier on, which is many of their parcels have dual use capabilities. So once a decision is made to go to the hospitality side, the 150 rooms,
Yep.
then the 130 or so
Yep.
resident, that goes away
Yep. Yep.
from the count.
So, anyway, we've spent a fair amount of time on this, longer than I had anticipated. But it's important, I think, to level set where we are. And all of this informs kind of continued traffic patterns, congestion, et cetera, and how long this kind of is going to persist. Again, we will continue to grow the baseline in terms of the number of people that live here, full or part-time. That's going, in and of itself, is going to increase traffic and amenities pressure. And then you're going to continue to have service providers and construction traffic associated with that for the foreseeable future. So that's why, dealing with, the capacity of the choke points and whether there's sufficient amenities to support continued growth is part of an ongoing conversation that involves KICA for behalf of its members as well as the broader community. John, we want to shift a little bit to anything else on kind of level setting where we are on this stuff. So one of the initiatives we talked about last year, we didn't move forward on this, is the desire to undertake a comprehensive review of our zoning code to both address some identified, like say, I characterize as kind of infirmities or issues that arise with our zoning code, but also to, recontextualize our zoning code for kind of where we are in a development pattern that is in the latter stages of primary development. It's increasingly going to shift to redevelopment and what that should entail. So part of it is simply literally completely rewriting our zoning code, but there's a technical aspect to that, but then there's also a kind of what are the goals and objectives associated with that. I know John or Stephanie, you want to talk a little bit, you guys are the planners, the idea of the difference between Euclidean-based zoning and others. I'm not sure it's worth getting into.
Euclidean-based zoning?
Yeah.
Your normal zoning.
Normal zoning.
Everyone's familiar with.
It's actually, I had thought when I first heard it had to do with Euclid. It does, Euclid, but it's a town.
Yeah, is it a cosine?
It's a town that where the Supreme Court decision, the U.S. Supreme Court decision a long time ago upheld.
Ohio.
Yeah, Ohio, Euclid,
Yeah,
Ohio.
Those darn Ohio ones.
It's a tangential comment, Mr. Spencer.
And John, if you go to the mic, because people are having a hard time hearing you. Thank you.
Well, I'll begin, I guess, with the sort of a framework of setting the level of, we have not updated our zoning code. Our original zoning code was written in 1994, immediately after the State Enabling Act. I think it's a great exercise, and just from a routine checkup, if you will. I think we've been blessed to do in the last year plus some very fine-tuning. I think they've been described as rifle shots on some cleanup things. But comprehensively, this exercise of looking at the entire zoning code allows us to really be more sharp in the effect of the zoning code. To date, there's a number of, I think, inconsistencies, just how we apply it. I think from an administrative standpoint, that this exercise will allow us to clean up, do an overhaul. When we look at specifically the different sections in our zoning code, I think this is the exercise that we want to make sure that talks to various sections, whether it be within the zoning code itself or other ordinances that have been adopted, whether they're local in our municipal code, state statute, or any other federal laws that make sure that they're consistent. So that's primarily the purpose of really ensuring that there's consistency in the vision. And typically you see jurisdictions will do this 5 to 7 years, not necessarily a complete overhaul, but I think a true really evaluation of their zoning code to make sure they're consistent with their comprehensive plan vision. When we wrote out Kiawah Next, the thought pattern is this is Kiawah entering into its next phase of existence, not necessarily abandoning its original vision, but really looking at how it will interplay and exist, maintain, sustain in its next era. And so I think our zoning code needs to be able to complement that vision. To date, there are a number of terminologies from a zoning and administrative standpoint that are non-existent in our zoning code. We did the exercise of looking at our use table in-house this past year, and looking at surely streamlining the modified uses, but there are a number of definitions that we need to be able to clean up to ensure consistency. Even just the nomenclature of terms that are used in the broader planning world that are not defined in our code today, I think is the other part of it. from a macro level, the specific sections, I don't know if I'll walk through the specific sections I think that we definitely want to address during this process. But I think before I get into that, I think there is some hesitation of maybe council members, some planning commission members about process of going through the comprehensive plan. So that kind of gives us a little bit of hesitation to going this route of putting it out to have a consultant come help with this process. But the underpinning of having the legal expertise, that's really one of the critical points of having some outside help, but just additionally just the time and resources it would take to modify standards that what I think married to the resiliency focus that we're heading in, or in, I don't want to say heading, that we're beginning to really embark. So legally sound, clear, consistent. The other part of the visioning exercise for this underwrite is a lot of times zoning codes speak very legalese, and I think for my desire would be to have a code that anyone can kind of pick up and make sure that they really understand. Make sure that it is legally sound, but I think from the average person who, whether it's an architect or a homeowner who picks up the zoning code, they would be able to understand and great depth be able to relate and understand what it's allowed to do, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, preventions, restrictions, etc. So that's really the framework. As I mentioned, special area planning is something that was introduced a few years ago. I heard yesterday, in essence, the discussion of Eugenia Avenue. We've been trying to figure out what the beach overlay looks like for the entirety of this beach. But Atlantic Beach, Eugenia Avenue, those are really specialized areas. Maybe there needs to be some unique zoning standards that apply to those types of neighborhoods, communities. I think this exercise allows us to really focus in and have some community type led engagement with those property owners to really say, hey, is there something specific for this neighborhood that works, that doesn't work for necessarily another section of Kiawah? I think that's the type of process that allows a public engagement that's not just a month by month, week by week looking at one section of the code, but making sure that any and all those questions are addressed by the subdivision. That subdivision process is one of the things that we would need to address. The stormwater management as we go through this process with Weston and Sampson. Their recommendations and moving forward, we want to fold in that into our code comprehensively. So we look at the development process not just from a zoning administration standpoint, but really from pre-development and how someone is imagining a site before they even get to the details of the zoning code. The other part of that I want to make sure that is contextualized is our future land use designations and how those align to where we are headed from a zoning standpoint. We have a vision of what Kiawah, what the broader context of Kiawah should look like and feel like, how that marries to what the zoning code says. What does R1 residential really mean? I think us understanding the number of what density levels are current density levels appropriate? And when I'm saying are appropriate, I believe they are. I don't think that's communicating how the average person understands what 4 units per acre or 1 unit per acre really means. So I'll stop there and then I'll think maybe go into process and procedures or a timeline rather, if there's any questions about kind of what I've shared so far.
And also welcome the chair of the Planning Commission chiming in about any of this. We have been undertaking, the Planning Commission's been undertaking you use the term rifle shot, but addressing a number of specifically identified issues in our current code. That process has been ongoing. But every time you peel away one layer of the onion, then you find additional issues. So there are a host of inconsistencies. I think a lot of the problem is, and we saw this going through the use table, is that our zoning code was largely adopted from Charleston counties. And for example, it had a wide range of uses that were by right uses or special exception uses, I think which there'd be almost unanimous agreement would not have been appropriate for Kiawah Island at any point in time. So kind of why were they in there? It's only because when the town was kind of early stages, so all you had was Charleston counties, and Charleston County was actually the planning staff for the town. But we're evolved past that. Our code hasn't really kept up. We continue to put fingers in the dike and try to identify new issues to respond to changing conditions. Mark Bramar has been one of those who said we need to kind of step back and take a fresh look at all of this rather than this piecemeal approach. I suspect, John can talk a little bit about the process, but we're still going to be on a path, kind of a dual path. We're still going to find things that maybe need to be addressed here and now, because this exercise for a complete rewrite is not going to be, it's going to be a fairly lengthy one, especially you get into all these engagements with individual neighborhoods. But so back to the just what we need to think about from an action item standpoint, whether the council first really agrees that we need to go down this path. It's a recommendation of the planning department. It's a recommendation of the planning commission, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to reemphasize, yes, we will continue our rifle shot approach because this process is going to take a long time to redo the whole thing, and there are some items like we're working on the parking table, for example. There are some items that we don't want to let go for a year or two.
Beach overlay is one right now, and there's some other things that are occurring. The issue which John alluded to is there were a lot of frustration. We, the town, has not had the best experience overall across the board with, consultant relationships and managing consultant relationships and appropriately setting kind of the frame of reference for how a project's going to proceed. And there was a lot of pushback, particularly about the early stages of the consultant involvement in Kiawah Next and the comprehensive plan. And so that...
We've had some discussions. I've talked with Ms. Hennessy a little bit about this, and I think we've learned a lot of lessons from the comprehensive plan. But with what's the current thinking is that one, I think, major lesson, which is a little bit more too many hands at the early stage of direction-wise, and still establishing just a central core steering committee that would administer this process, and that would be primarily led by the Planning Commission chair and a few others. I think that is the direction that would allow us to focus in directly with the consultant, opposed to having 5-10 different people giving directions, if you will. And that steering committee allows the rhythm of engagement with the community to be monitored throughout that process. I think that's the route that I've outlined so far. We haven't released the RFP, but in the draft form of that, having an established steering committee specifically for the RFP and direction of the consultants, and then it would be up to council to approve that, and having a representative from council on that steering committee as well, to ensure that we're consistent with what the vision of the comprehensive plan has been outlined. And then we should have some discussion level of engagement of a community representative. But from the start period, it would be direction through a steering committee. I think that would address some of the...
Is to establish a steering committee on the comprehensive zoning code rewrite to help frame all of that. But then we're also going to need to, it's already in this, did we put it in this year's budget, or did we take it out? It's still in this year's budget.
It'll more like roll.
It's approximately 100,000 or so. I can't remember what the number was. Maybe it was
100 for this year we had, and then 50 for next year.
Okay.
100,
So,
150
an anticipated $150,000 for a consultant, which is a combination of kind of a firm that has planning and legal expertise. And I think there have been some firms that have been identified in that regard that have done this exercise on behalf of other municipalities. We're not, as you noted, other municipalities tend to do this at some point in their lifespan and occasionally redo it every few years. We really haven't.
Correct.
So, question?
So I guess my comment would be, my gut reaction is I'm a little bit leery of this, as you can imagine, for a couple different reasons. One is, and maybe part of it's process. So the consultant side of it, first and foremost, scares the daylights out of me for historical reasons. I had clear, direct involvement with the consultant for the comprehensive plan, who I thought was awful.
Well, we tried to get rid of that consultant.
We tried. We did try to get
And
rid of him
it
and
was just a
changing
bad
and
fit.
all of that, and it
I
was,
think what we're needing here, Luke, is technical expertise. Now, we are adding a new member to the Planning Commission who does he speaks regulation, which is a good thing. He has experience on both public and private side, writing regulations, and I think should be involved in this, and will be able to help. This is new to me, I didn't think about community members on this. I think this is a technical rewrite, and I don't think we want a big committee.
Right.
You know, we want some people actually doing the work on this.
so that was gonna be my second point is, so consultants make me nervous,
Yeah.
given my experience with planning. Number two is complete rewrite. That concerns me because, like the rifle shot approach, or again, it's a process. If you take kind of a section by section by section and think of it like that, but doing a whole rewrite at one time, a lot gets lost in the details. And if we're trying to make this clear and more effective, it almost seems like a rifle shot or a focused approach on sections makes more sense.
That's how I'm envisioning.
So I want to,
For a section at a time and
So-
look at the writing. You know, we've had some instances where people interpret the way it's written. We just had something with this dock issue, interpreting a regulation in different ways. So we want to make sure the wording of the regulations is clear and the intent is consistent with where we want Kiawah to go in the future. So that's how I'm viewing it.
so just to piggyback off a little bit, the process-wise, any overhaul wouldn't just be a new document switching out with the old document. It really would be in phases, and so it'd be looking at sections of the code at a time. We want to be able to bucket items or categories of the code which relate to each other, and that way you're addressing potential concerns and things that might address or tangents, touch points rather, that come up when questions arise for a particular section. So it isn't just one document being switched out for another. This is almost a 12-month could go even longer to 24 months type long process, because you're really sectioning out the code in all of the different elements of zoning.
Okay, yeah, I would think if we do this, 12 months is too short, just knowing
Yeah, 12 months is very low end of this. This is very low end of that.
I think that the third thing that, while I think it's admirable in having a code that anybody could read, my son could read and understand it, I think the most important thing is having a code that correctly litigates or defines what we want to have happen. And if there's some legalese needed in there such that that's appropriate, that's better than having something that's just readable by anybody, to me. So it's stuff that's going to stand up to the test of time, stand up to lawyers. And language, as you well know, Mr. Mayor, language is important. And so we've got to get the right language in there such that it's it's not impeachable, or it is impeachable, not impeachable language.
I read from you just the one sentence or brief part of that introduction: incorporate legally sound, clear, consistent, and streamlined processes to ensure interrelated issues addressed with no inconsistencies or conflict among various sections. So that's the intent, to make sure you're reading one section and it might say something else in a different section, and we want to just make sure there's a few instances in our code where you might read one section and it might infer something else. So we want to make sure that they talk and be legally clear.
Okay. And then the last thing is, when you said look, kind of have the code effective neighborhood by neighborhood, that again makes me nervous. I wouldn't necessarily want different standards from a town code. You might have regimes that have overlays or something that are more or less more restrictive. But I want it to be consistent across the whole island. So what's happening in Inlet Cove is consistent, maybe not identical, but consistent with what's happening at Ocean Park.
I agree completely. We had talked about doing anything neighbor. It's a code for the whole town, and it should be consistently applied.
So I'm going to push back there because I think the difference is understanding what the zoning standard is for that particular neighborhood. What is done in Inlet Cove or Ocean Park, the development standards would be kind of, you can look at them being different from the preserve. And so we really need to look at the neighborhoods, community areas that are alike and apply a standard by what those neighborhoods need, because the issues are different. The calls and concerns that we get from the property owners in Atlantic Beach will be different from what we get from those out in the preserve. And having a zoning code to speak to those issues is a direction I think that council should be looking at, because ultimately the processes for review, I think that's the component that will be consistent among the code. But as far as the application of zoning standards, that's the piece where I think you might have some puzzle pieces that move along.
We should take that offline and talk about it, because
Right.
I'm not sure I would agree just in here right now. There's a lot of devil in the details there, but to have a different standard, it's almost like having a different building code for Ocean Park versus Inlet Cove. I would not say that's appropriate. So I'd have to understand kind of what the different zoning standards would mean. If
And
you're
it
talking
could
about
be
different buffers
semantics.
for different lot sizes, you can make the zone for different lot sizes, but I don't think
That's the type of thing that the level of detail. But when I took 70.
Yeah, can I just pop in? I think you take off. I think a lot of this, what we're talking about is modernizing our zoning standards. You're going to have to show examples. A lot of communities, yesterday, one of the things that Mark talked about when we were talking about something was looking at winter resort communities. So if you're looking across the country at different zoning areas, they do create within their zoning code, some call them special area zoning. This wouldn't be something unique, but I think it's something that by pulling examples and showing Joanne, council, the different types of new zoning techniques that community can use. We have a very, very old zoning technique. And if there's ways to be able to incorporate some new things, and maybe not the proper term is by area, but that's what some communities do, they still are very much in line with each other. And Mark, you probably have also can speak more intelligently on this. So I've been out of the zoning world for a little bit, but I still have to keep my credits up, and I still see what other zoning codes and I was part of a partial rewrite for the city of Spartanburg, and we used the unique code, and that was probably about 15 years ago. It was called Transit. Urban type of zoning code was just in the central business district, and we left everything else the old way. So there are techniques. I think what you're saying is that, yeah, they can be out there, but let's kind of talk offline. Let's see what's available, and let's see what fits Kiawah.
Stephanie, what do you mean by a different zoning technique?
You're talking about like transit-oriented development.
That's
for example.
one.
I know
It's older now. It's probably about 20 years old or so. It's been around for a long time. As I was looking a couple weeks ago, there are other kind of form-based codes, techniques that some now in the world of land use planning, you have some scholars, a school of thought that still likes a form-based code. And now I'm seeing that there's another type, it's off the top of my, I can't think of it, I've been trying to think of it, but I can't. There's another type of zoning technique that you can use with regards to like standards. You're looking at potentially, it could, not that we want to do this, but it's almost like Eugenia, which when that was created, they had different setbacks for those areas. Not saying we like that, but those could be looking at building height, setbacks, lot coverage, buffer yard requirements.
I want to share is it's not just when I think about I use the word neighborhoods or special areas. I don't want you to be focused just on necessarily like a Eugenia. Think about contextually of the environment around the different properties. So how we treat marshfront opposed to how we might treat something that's adjacent to a wooded lot. So those are the types of things that I'm thinking about, of having the ability to look truly at what we have today. And I don't want to scare saying, hey, we're going to be pulling something totally different from elsewhere to just throw it on top of Kiawah. That's not what I'm trying to present here. The idea is really to understand, when you use the word modernize. That might not be the right word again, but it's really looking at the vision that we've already seen of maintaining or being able to sustain what Kiawah already has, but bringing it into present day zoning and planning.
So part of the, I guess the question is, because being not inexpensive, lengthy exercise, let's stipulate that there are a bunch of problems with our current zoning code, is how much time and effort in kind of coming up with this new terminology and technique makes sense, given the fact, based on our earlier conversation, that we only have 300 new undeveloped single-family units and several pockets of commercial that may be the subject of development agreements or PDDs and not base zoning in any event. So that's one of the things I'm struggling with a little bit, is how big and broad this really needs to be. Does it make sense? Because I don't have, for example, specific thing is, how does all of this interact, regardless if you pick on Eugenia, Atlantic Beach, or anything else, with the fact that I just learned, again, 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, that we have this book where every single parcel on Kiawah Island, doesn't matter what's in R1, R2, and R3 standards, every single parcel has its own.
That's the type of thing that having those discussions what might be the best tool to level set, particularly as we enter redevelopment.
But I guess what I'm saying, are you contemplating that there would be the potential for tearing up all of those currently platted parcel setback requirements and rethinking all of those?
I don't want to take that off the table.
Okay.
But I think that is something that should be explored, because the challenge of administering that through the redevelopment process, when you want to be able to have a new vision for where property vision, sight lines, and those things are created, I think that has to be still on the table.
Well, I guess my point was, I didn't mean to try and litigate this here. I heard what you're saying. I've been through some of this before. I do question the need for not zoning improvements, but a whole rewrite. I do question the need for modernization, because sort of what's tried and true's worked. I do question the need for taking other areas that are dissimilar to ours and trying to find things that we should use just to again, modernize. I do question the efficacy of a consultant. I'm not saying we shouldn't do this. I'm not saying, and it's about what do we want to do? What's our definition of what are we trying to accomplish? And how do we accomplish it? And what's the process? Those are probably the three things.
So can I suggest this as a potential course of action? We can put a placeholder or not in the upcoming budget for additional consultant resources. I agree that we're not quite there yet. What was discussed was the potential of standing up this ad hoc group or work group that would come up with a proposed action plan without a consultant at that juncture, or if you did have a consultant to help frame that, it wouldn't be a $100,000 contract. It would be a little very modest contract to say, here's what our goals and objectives are, and see if this little group, some members of the Planning Commission, a council member, and a couple community members, to try to say, can we put this on paper as to what exactly we hope to accomplish, what this would look like, and then come back with a proposal.
That would make sense to me, yeah.
Luke, let's meet offline and talk about this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sold. I'm not sold.
You're not sold on what?
On what? Yeah.
That, what you just said.
So not sold, then.
So what would be your
What is
suggestion?
your?
I don't have a suggestion.
Oh, okay.
Russ?
You're not sold on the rewrite, or you're not sold on?
What I
The
do.
whole approach.
The whole approach.
No sale yet.
I don't have a strong opinion. I'm not sure. I don't have the experience to say which way I want to go yet. Yeah, I'm not in the same camp. I'm not sure what the right answer is.
I'm just unclear on the whole thing.
Like Russ, I've not much experience in this, so Let's see how this unfolds as you take these steps and see what.
But I just proposed, I don't know what we're trying to figure out, what are the steps? You're saying, let's take these steps, what steps?
I think what you recommend.
But she's just saying she doesn't agree with what I just recommended.
I'm just not, I mean, certainly go ahead and move forward, but
Very easy. Yeah, I think what you recommend is very easy. Yeah.
Let's get a set of what are we really trying to do? What are our objectives? You know, because modernizing the code hasn't been something I've been thinking about. I've been thinking more about fixing the inconsistencies in the code and making it clearer and updating certain things that, like our rifle shot approach on the stuff we've done before. So let's talk more about it and
So that's sort of what I heard.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Not that we're not, it's not to come, it's to try to present back to us exactly how,
Yeah.
if there's a consensus among this group as to how we move forward and what that
I'll
entails.
have more opinion after you do that.
Yeah.
So
I
maybe
think my
John,
overarching comment is, like, as you said, Mr. Mayor, is we don't have a lot left to go. And so what's the problem we're trying to fix?
The problem one problem we're trying to fix is there's still a lot of issues with our current code.
Inconsistencies.
Our current code doesn't, there's a lot of inconsistencies. There's a lot of things like we have R1, R2, and R3, and I find out those standards in many respects are also, almost meaningless. We had 1276 or 1278, which was our waterfront development standards, which was kind of buried. You couldn't actually you had to originally come to the town hall to actually get that. It now shows up in our code. We do have this question, like we're looking at our beachfront overlay, is do rear setbacks or setbacks on interior properties, or is 20 feet the right thing for interior properties as well as those that are fronting the marsh or ocean? There's a whole bunch of issues.
The other two things I'll add, just from a broader standpoint, we've already gotten recommendations out of our previous plans that suggest that we touch up holistically areas of our code. So it's just really following what has already been recommended as part of, within our marsh management plan alone.
And what I would envision, I'm not persuaded as well as all this new forms, new techniques, because I don't have a good enough understanding of this. The idea is part of whether this little group that are constituted can come to some consensus and make a recommendation as to whether it's just a comprehensive fixing of our current code. Somebody systematically going through and identifying all the cross-references, updating it to current state standards or federal standards, changing some of the terminology. We've identified a bunch of definitions that are simply wrong, and doing all of that, or whether it's something more fundamental than that would involve a major kind of consultant exercise.
And let me just tag on to that, because that was one of the big issues. Thank you. One of the big issues we had with a former consultant was they were trying to modernize it, and they did not understand Kiawah and Kiawah's dynamics.
Yep.
So they wanted more multi-use. They wanted more modal transportation and all these things that
More of these
did
little
not
village
work.
centers.
Village center did not work on Kiawah. And even after pounding on them for a year, they still didn't get it. They wanted to take Charleston's approach and overlay it here. So I think there's things we should probably look at and learn about, but that's another reason why the consultant aspect is maybe nervous.
This group may come back and conclude that some of the things that Stephanie and John have just talked about is these different forms, things that are community, are just not right for Kiawah. Maybe that group will be persuaded that it is, and then they can better educate us.
So I would be happy to sit down with Joanne and John and kind of define what we're trying to accomplish. And then what the process is from that, we can figure that out. But and come back with concrete examples of here's an inconsistency and it's 20 times in the book or whatever, things like that.
I'm maybe suggesting something a little bit more formal. Formal's not quite the right word in that. Is, a council member or two or three members of the planning commission maybe engagement with other community members or folks like, Mr. Permar or a couple of other community members to sit down collectively and over a handful of meetings and see if you can put on paper a proposal to bring back to the council.
I would suggest that Luke, John, and I sit down first.
Okay.
Because I don't think, other than Mr. Permar, you're going to find a community member who has read the code. And, well, actually, there may be one now that I think of it. But let us sit down and talk first before we get a whole bunch of people
And
involved.
Brad, if it's okay, because of me having a planning background, I would like to also sit down with you.
Yes.
And this is really to decide whether we want to do this or not, is really what it is.
It's whether to go through this consultant comprehensive, well, there still may or may not be an intention to hire a consultant. The question may be whether this is a complete rewrite or this is getting somebody else to help us just clean up everything that's wrong with our current code.
Sure what's in Kiawah next.
Okay?
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Can we take a break now? We're behind schedule, but we're going longer on this one. But 10 minutes?
Sure, thanks.
Okay.
That's a lot to be whenever you guys
Thank you.
decide to happen.
We'll probably start a little lunch. Well,
You can
people.
start at 12:30, yeah. Whatever.
I guess we're waiting on the.
It's Roberta. I think the 18 is okay.
Because we need to check with them and 19 eventually.
I think it's okay.
All right, let's go ahead and get started again. What we have next listed, and I don't think we need to spend much time on this, is the development agreement and annexation. We actually discussed this topic at some length last year. And it was, as much as anything else, kind of the objectives that would underpin any new development agreements or planned development districts. And I think the consensus view, and tell me if anybody has a different view, is that to the extent that the town would consider entering into one of those, they need to be mutually beneficial agreements.
They need to be what?
Mutually beneficial agreements. And that there needs to be a clear, that if the property owner is going to propose something that is in their economic interest, there also has to be a clear community interest in moving forward with that, because what you're doing at least in the context of a development agreement, is locking in for some period of time existing zoning standards and constraining the ability of future councils to be able to revise zoning standards to change, to adapt to changed circumstances, which is an issue we've experienced before. And so that it's a negotiation process.
I think that's my understanding of where we left. I think maybe fine-tune would be an emphasis on adjacent property owners' interests when we think of community interest.
Well, to be clear, there is, whether it's a development agreement or planned development, in particular regard to development agreements, consistent with our code and our revised code, which we updated, made some changes, is there's a full community input process. There is no ability, while I may be having initial conversations with the resort about a desired new development agreement, it's been made clear at every turn that, whatever we might kind of notionally be prepared to present to the Planning Commission and the Council, there is a still full, robust process that would
The
involve
only
engagement.
real emphasis I was trying to make is that the town's a big place, and the emphasis on potentially impacted neighboring communities, I think is something we
Well,
need to
and I would think that the Planning Commission and the Council would give due consideration to the interest of those most immediately impacted by.
So I agree with Lance, and I might take it a half a step further. So we're locking in or giving up the edit rights for 5 or 10 years. And why is that in the best interest of the community? What are we getting in return for locking up those development rights? I mean, we struggle now with a lot of different issues, whether it's traffic, whether it's amenities, open space. I would take it a half step further and say there needs to be a clear benefit from the community for this development, not just those guys maximizing units, given some appropriate buffering. I think it needs to be a half step further than that, if that makes sense.
Okay, and it's a conversation that I've had and others in the room have been part of, is to kind of emphasize that, as I look at the literature out here about the purpose of development agreements in other contexts, there is this idea of a mutual exchange of consideration, as it were. That yes, you don't simply giving a developer what they want for some period of time unless there is a discernible community benefit to giving up that
That's
future.
exactly what I'm trying. You said it much more eloquently.
So,
Okay.
but with that all said, consideration can be a lot of things. And, buying a parcel of land and building a community center as an amenity, does that offset the impact to the communities near the development? They may not care about the broader community getting a community center if it's affecting their quality of life.
And I
They get
think,
input, yeah.
I think that is going to be the totality. I'll push back maybe just a little bit in that regard. is. Certainly those immediately impacted neighbors' interests need to be taken into consideration, but at the end of the day, if there is a clear broader community benefit, then the question is, everything's always a balancing. Is that a kind of a net benefit to the community as a whole outweigh some other, either giving up certain rights or, again, be careful, a differential impact on neighboring properties relative to the community as a whole?
That's why I keep saying an emphasis on that.
Yeah, okay.
They're the ones that are going to deal with it most.
Yeah, an example would be somebody putting in a circle at the main gate, but that would affect your community. So it could be judged beneficial for the island, and I'm not sure, I'm not saying I want to do that. I'm just saying, but it could negatively impact you.
And those are exactly the kinds of things, and if the impacted community, makes a compelling case that their interests should outweigh those of the broader community, if there is a differential impact, then that's what the public input process.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I would personally would not want to affect the local, I would lean in that direction.
Well, and I think at least as we saw with previous plans with regard to earlier, this goes back now almost 3 years ago with the initial proposals for PDD and Upper Beachwalker, that the council took the approach that, and I certainly took the approach. Now, in interest of full disclosure, I was one of those impacted, but that all the surrounding neighborhoods, unless you could get support from them as to that any development projects that were ongoing, understanding just saying no was not the outcome. But that something that made sense to address local traffic concerns and things like that, with stormwater, would be necessary in order to get a broader council approval.
And that's kind of what I was thinking too, that you and I both, full disclosure, have been, affected communities. Our roles were different when the last events happened. You were on council. I was
Actually, I was not on council when it was being, I was not on council when it was first being presented, because that goes back, I think, a full 3 years, maybe 4 years now. Anyway, so I'm not sure, do we need to we talked a little bit about the need to potentially annex the roads. I don't think there's anything else. We have an annexation manual. I'm not sure we need to discuss much else on this topic now. The only thing I can say with regard to development agreements is conversations have been ongoing. I think there's still a desire on the part of the resort to have a new development agreement, and ideally, from their perspective, it would be 10 years. And so the conversations are about, okay, what are your interests and how do those, align with what the community's interests are. So nothing to, present to Planning Commission or Council as of yet. And so those discussions, like I said, are ongoing.
What about Upper Beachwalkers?
I have not, John, I've not heard anything further. I don't see Bruce. I don't know. As you know, as part of the mediated settlement agreement, now the developer has development rights by right with regard to the parcel 11 and the church parcel. What was mediated agreed was less than had originally been presented. Took, I think, a floor off of parcel 11 and removed one building from the church parcel. I don't know that there's anything, that has come forward with further.
Those have been submitted for building review. I think they still might be under building review.
John, you have to speak up.
I said those have been submitted under building review.
Yeah.
Whether or not they've received final approval for building, I can chat with Bruce, but they're still under the review process.
And I don't know if anybody else in the room has any comment about that as to whether, in fact, there would be an intention simply to move forward with that, or there would still be a desire to, incorporate the other parcels that were not subject to the mediation settlement agreement and overall plan development or not. I don't have any update on that.
all quiet. I mean, that's my own help.
It's been
Very quiet.
Been fairly quiet.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Now maybe
The only comment I would make is supporting what John said, which is the buildings on parcel 11 have been, I don't know how long they've been through the permitting process, but as far as I know, they're pretty close to being fully permitted.
Yeah,
Pretty close to what?
being permitted.
Permitted, building.
Yeah, building permit, yes.
Building permit.
Yeah.
But there's no indication yet of PD, which might make
No.
sense for the whole area.
Well, it wouldn't change that. A PD would embrace the other parcels, but the parcel 11, the applicant has been going through the process.
It's been going through the process that,
Securing
in terms
a building permit to start
in
the
terms of
project.
gaining the permits that are allowed by the mediated settlement.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so probably there won't be a PD, there may.
No, I wouldn't say,
Yeah,
I wouldn't say
I-
that. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I?
Yes, please. Yeah.
What I'm saying, Joanne, is that the focus has been principally and almost solely on securing a building permit per the outcome of the agreement, and awaiting that with the intent of them proceeding with the project. There has been modest activity on the remaining parcels as a possible planned development application for the remaining parcels.
Okay, that'll be interesting. I would have thought it would have made more sense to include 11 in the church parcel, but
Well,
we'll see what happens.
I mean, they can be included, but what would be presented is buildings as permitted.
Yeah. So, again, whether or not the developer wants to move forward with what they're entitled to do under the mediation and settlement agreement pursuant to the then permits that are issued, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, we'll have to wait.
Shifting gears now, we have a subject on, and this relates a little bit to kind of overall managing growth and development on the island, short-term rentals. And there are a number of issues that have come up, and kind of the question I'm posing is whether the time has come for the town to take kind of a fresh look at our short-term rental ordinance and some specific provisions of that, but more broadly, what our kind of goals and objectives are as a community vis-a-vis short-term rentals. First, a couple of data points, and this is
the map, or I know it's really busy, so I can enlarge it a little bit and just.
So one of the things you'll see here is there's a lot of red. So people are under, I think, the misimpression.
And the red stands for?
Short-term rentals, that's the rental
Yeah.
properties.
Can you zoom in on Eugenia?
There is a misimpression that there is some real cap on short-term rentals on Kiawah Island, in the town of Kiawah Island. There is not. I want to make that crystal clear. There is not. There is no cap on short-term rentals on Kiawah Island. What there are caps on the number of short-term rentals in certain areas of the island. There is no restriction whatsoever under our current code on the overall number of short-term rentals on Kiawah Island. Now, numbers. We have how many short-term rentals?
So let me just clarify that there are short-term rental caps in certain neighborhoods?
Yes.
Or certain?
Not neighborhood
Not
zone.
neighborhood
Well,
zone.
Zone.
I'm trying to get clarity on the
Well,
word.
they're zones and neighborhoods. There are certain caps in specific.
So there's a cap in R1 zoning, so mainly behind the second gate, and then some R2 neighborhoods.
Yes.
And the R2
Okay, so
neighborhood
it's based on zoning classification.
zoning classification,
Got it.
yes. And the,
But it's
The R-
only, it's only
the-
some R2, not all R2.
the R2 ones that are under the 20% is Indigo Park, Ocean Oaks.
I don't even know what the 20% means.
The cap.
there can't be more than 20% of the dwelling units within that neighborhood or the zoning district, in case of R1, can be short-term rentals.
Yeah, and then R2, the rest of it is Indigo Park, Ocean Oaks, Ocean Park, Silver Moss, Osprey Point, which includes Club Cottage Lane, Marsh Cottage Lane, and Shell Creek Landing.
Do we have
Sounds like
do we have a chart on that?
This is, yes.
I can't emphasize this more than enough. There is no overall cap on the number of short-term rentals on Kiawah Island.
Overall, but there is by location.
Only some locations.
Some locations.
A lot of R2 and none of R3 are subject to, portions of R2 and all of R3 are
I
not
understand.
subject.
There are caps at certain locations.
Yes, that's right.
And I have a list of, so all R1, R2 that are capped are listed right there. Maybe it's easier for you to see all those streets.
So are those caps fixed, or are they something that could potentially be up for discussion?
Well, that's exactly the conversation we're going to have, but I want to put a different number in front of you. What is the number of current short-term rental licenses?
So the licenses itself is...
Not number of licenses, because there's dual counting.
Licensed properties, okay.
Yeah, licensed
It's
short-term rental.
1346.
What's that?
1346.
1346 out of 4,100, kind of do the math, I should pull up my...
That's a lot.
Yes, that's the problem, it's over a third of all dwelling units on Kiawah Island are in the short-term rental program.
So
That is a very high number compared to many other communities. Many other communities have overall caps of 20%. So the issue is that the right number? Do we care if the number of short-term rental properties continues to go up as new units come on, whether multifamily or single family? Do we care that the number of short-term rentals grows over time? Or do we have a policy decision that where we are now is all we want to have, or think about retrenchment over time? Those are the kinds of things that other communities are grappling with.
So
I'm not trying to answer the question.
In answer to your initial post, I need a whole lot more information on this, because in order to answer the last question you just posed, I don't even know if there's a problem. So how can I determine whether or not it's enough, it's too many, unless I know that there are issues?
I was going to bring that up because I'm surprised it's 33%, and then I'm saying, okay, well, that must not be bad.
Do I hear
because
about it?
That's the whole point. That's the whole point.
So,
I think it depends on where you live, by the way, too.
So, and it does, because there are those areas that have no caps at all. Those that are probably the areas that are under some caps probably don't feel it nearly as much, because I think if you show the distribution, how many of the, how close to the cap are, the ones that are capped, they're not close to the cap.
correct. So this is, yes.
They're not even close to the cap.
But
So you know what I would like to ask Rob and/or Saz, are there problem areas that are?
That's a very good question, and the answer is everywhere there's a shorter driveway and more visibility from the street where we're actually patrolling from, there's going to be a lot more enforcement activity in those areas. Those longer driveways, surf song, flyaway, places where you can't see one house from another, there's going to be almost no enforcement activity in those.
So I want to separate out for a minute some issues with, again, I'm just trying to frame a bunch of questions that have come up. We've gotten emails recently. I mean, the Planning Commission member just sent us an email about some issues and concerns. We've gotten another one that said, gee, we want caps on a street-by-street basis, which becomes really impractical. But I want to talk first, because this is managing growth and development, and then get to separate issues related to code enforcement violations that may or may not be associated with rental properties. But first, from a growth and development standpoint, understand that when you have the short-term rental properties, that entails not just the family coming in each week. It also means you have bike deliveries, you have cleaning services, you have property management. So there's a huge amount of cycling, of turnover associated with rental properties. So how much of them, we don't really have a good idea of, for example, the traffic coming in on the island is servicing short-term rental prices. So every Saturday, and my only experience was in our neighborhood before we changed our covenants to eliminate short-term rentals. You had 5 properties, but every Saturday you had families leaving and coming in, and then you had property management companies in, you had the cleaning services in, and you had bicycle pickups and drop-offs.
So there's more
Constant.
to that. The dynamic is changing. And much more I'm seeing are going to the Airbnb model. And so the weekly rentals I'm seeing over the last several years changing drastically to long weekends, Thursday through Tuesday. So we're seeing a lot of that churn going on here.
So let's put aside, let's say that every short-term renter was extraordinarily well-behaved and never violated a municipal ordinance at all. Just put that aside for now, we'll come back to that one in a minute. Are there any issues with regard to, since we're trying to manage traffic flow, traffic congestion, and things like that, to what extent are short-term rentals a significant contributor to that? Do we care if more multifamily properties that come online and or more single-family properties that come online continue to increase the number of short-term rental properties or not, and all the kind of the turnover that's associated with that? Like I said, I'm just kind of giving a lot of inputs we receive, posing that question.
We don't have data to support that, although one would feel that there has to be some, but a couple points. We don't have data to support that either way.
Data on what?
Is there a higher traffic count other than the check-in time, whether or not they generate more traffic? But I just, one other point I just want to get out is I remember John Zolgar yesterday came out and said each single-family home has 9 round trips a day, which I thought was rather high. Yeah. But you have to look at the incremental then. If a normal single-family home is going to have 9 trips a day, all right, so how many more are you getting in the rental program?
Yeah,
That's a rhetorical question.
I'm with Russ and Madeline. I think we need a lot more data. One said, is there a problem, or what are the problems? 2, what are the statistics better? The fact that 33% have licenses, how many of them rent for 2 weeks a year or less? How many rent for 4 weeks a year? How many rent for 6 months?
2 weeks or a year or less, they don't have to have a short-term rental.
Whatever, you know what I'm saying? It's, some rent for the minimum number, 7 weeks or 11 weeks, you don't have to pay tax, and some rent around the clock. Some are full-time. So I think we need a lot more data on, is there a problem? What are the problems? And what's the makeup of the rental market in the place before I can make any decisions?
So I've got a couple of questions too.
By the way, I'm not suggesting that there be any decision made about any ordinance changes today at all. So just kind of teeing up and get to this, maybe another task force or not. That's kind of where I'm leading to.
So I'd be interested in understanding how many short-term rental licenses are to LLCs.
Or what?
To LLCs.
Investor owned.
Well, and Sherry,
Because they're-
at one point, we talked about the homes, increasing number of homes that are fractional ownership. And how does that complicate this equation? So,
Because those are not short-term rentals.
they can't be?
They aren't. They're fractional
aren't
ownership.
defined
So
as.
can't each owner rent it out?
If it's not in their restrictions. So I get copies for fractional ownerships of those, and some of them written out that they cannot be put into short-term rentals.
But some can.
Some could if it's not.
It's just their governing documents.
Yeah.
The reason the LLC is an issue is because the type of owner is different in my observation of somebody who's got their home in a rental program to help afford their home that they like to use themselves versus somebody that's strictly a business.
I don't think it has to be an LLC to fit that.
But investment property solely, as opposed to, yes, a family owns this, they rent it out over the course of the summer because it allows them to, and they use it other times of the year, but that allows them to afford the mortgage.
Right.
With respect, I don't think it's going to tell us a lot, because like I had an LLC, in fact, my house is still in an LLC. That was about risk. It wasn't about, I wasn't going to rent it all the time, but it was about risk management in case something happened on the property.
That's a good point.
So
I don't know about the trust.
Well, no,
also.
I think he did, he was focused on a purely investor property
That's what I was
versus
trying to
the
get to.
ownership
They're all going to
structure.
be.
So we need to fine tune that question.
They're all going to be in LLCs.
But I think his focus was not on the form of ownership, because some people own their properties, whether they rent them or even own them outright as LLCs. It was more, is it simply somebody's bought that property simply, they don't ever spend a day there. It's only rented out.
I would tell you, I think the majority of the people who I know, including Mr. Frau and myself personally, we will buy the house and then rent it out until we full-time retire.
I
I
don't
think
know
that's a model.
It is a model. It is a model.
I think the model's changing, though. I'm
But-
noticing in Inlet Cove that there are more properties now that I have no idea who owns them.
Well, you're always going to have different categories, but a lot of the people who I know are renting them out until they fully retire, and then they're not.
You know, Brad, I never paid a lot of attention to this issue when it came up because I didn't intend to apply. But I never fully understood it, and if a property owner asked me to tell them about short-term rentals, I couldn't. And so I would be very interested in an additional study of this issue.
Yeah, me too.
Well, so, and now, so I want to, again, it's kind of just teeing up an issue, and what are the potential, are there legitimate issues and concerns with the traffic flow, congestion, et cetera, the maintenance? I mean, there is a reason that in higher density rental areas, insurance costs tend to be higher. Insurers will demand more, or will be, so what I'm trying to say it, there are more issues with regard to rental properties than are owner-occupied properties.
Damages and
Now, again, we've got a hybrid here. Most of our short-term rentals are partially owner-occupied, not full investment properties. I don't know what the numbers are. We can parse that. So just put aside that issue for a second. Whether we already have caps, we already have a zoning, a zoning code that, I mean, not a zoning code, a municipal code that has some caps. The caps really aren't meaningful because in the areas where there are caps, we're way below them, and they're not the areas that lend themselves to high increase, substantial increase in the number of short-term rentals. There are no caps on a good chunk of the island. You can see further west, particularly in multifamily areas. Do we want to consider, the question is, consider some aggregate cap, or just say the current level that's been pretty consistent is maybe where we want to be. We don't want to see any future growth or not. That's the kind of one of the questions to pose. Then there's a separate set of questions related to the way our short-term rental ordinance is written, and then are there unique code enforcement issues that tend to arise? Because if you look at the data from Barrier Island Ocean Rescue, I can't remember from our own staff, where I believe the second highest, either the highest number, I had it yesterday, of 2025 warnings was for short-term rental related, something like 355 for bikes and beach gear. Again, whether that should be part of our ordinance or not. But nonetheless, that's where violations tend to rise. We get a lot of complaints about too many cars being parked, et cetera.
I'm still in the same camp as Madeline and Luke. I could be the one off, but yes, the front gate is slow on Saturday mornings during the summer. And you know what my takeaway is? Aren't I lucky enough to live in a place that everybody wants to come to? I am dead serious. And I'll meet people at the sanctuary and they say, hey, where are you from? I say, I live here. And they say, you live here? And So the bottom line is, what are we trying to solve for? What's the problem?
That's the question that's being posed. Is there a problem that we want to solve for or
Okay.
not?
So
That's the question.
Okay.
We're simply presenting the numbers and the data
Okay.
right
A
now.
few more things I think we need to consider
Yeah.
as we're looking at this is, do we require a minimum of a week's rental? Because the behavior is changing, it's very observable that it's not Saturday to Saturday as much anymore. So should there be a minimum of a week? And that drives the churn, the traffic, and I think it drives behavior, because we're seeing behavior in my neighborhood of renters different if they're invested in a week here with their family versus they're popping in for a few days. It becomes more like they're staying at a hotel. You know, isn't there somebody here to take care of this kind of stuff going on? The other thing I think we need to consider, and I think this would help with the email we got yesterday as an example, is putting more teeth into accountability of the rental agencies and having their license be at risk if the people they're renting to are causing problems. I hear so many times that people call the rental agency and they just disregard it. And they're the ones finding the renters. And they ought to be managing it more proactively, or I think their license to rent on Kiawah should be at risk.
What was the letter that was received yesterday?
Gene
Got an email from Gene Babinek. Did you get it?
It's fairly detailed. It was sent to everybody.
Yeah, it was sent to
Fairly-
everybody in town council.
The third thing, and this is interesting, there's a common perception that there's no short-term rentals behind the second gate, which is wrong.
Yeah, it's factually incorrect, but it's 13 or 14%.
It's different. So you recall, you and I talked about this last summer, and John, help me with, because I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. These giant, multi-rental kind of, those companies that have been a problem. that-
Vacation
It's
clubs.
like vacation clubs.
I just sent
Yes.
it to you, Madeline.
Yes, the vacation
You're on
clubs.
it,
You
but
know,
I
I
just
have-
sent it to you.
I've heard quite a few complaints about the vacation club rentals and how they're being managed and the type of renter.
Our current ordinance actually addresses a little bit of that enforcement. So I believe if you had 3 violations that were, but not violations, but 3 tickets that you found guilty, you can lose the license. And
But
we-
that's only the individual property owner license under our current ordinance. That was, we identified that
Correct.
if it's a consistent problem, that's penalizing the individual property owner,
Yes.
not leaving harmless
Management
the
company,
management
yes.
company who, supposedly the
I
one
think the
managing.
management company ought to be managing, that's why they're hired.
I did,
Yeah,
I did
I
write
agree.
a letter to
Yeah.
Vacasa last year and saying that if you continue, because they also have a business license.
That's what I'm targeting.
Yes, not short-term rental, on individual properties, business license, that's, if they continue with all those violations, well, we're gonna revoke the license. And I believe things have changed a little bit last year with Vacasa. Right now, they sold their properties, so she's no longer here. But, so we do have an option of just revoking the license of a management company if there is, they not legally adhere to our ordinance.
So one of the, now, again, just kind of presenting data and then kind of the enforcement issue are, again, just kind of gathering data, are the primary source of code violations associated with renters or not? And if so, does that matter to folks in terms of what our approach should be to continued growth or not of short-term rentals? I don't know whether just kind of anecdote, I don't know if you have a specific data or anecdotally as to, whether like off-leash violations. Clearly, all the violations you cite with regard to beach and bike gear at short-term rentals is, specific to short-term rentals because we have ordinance requirements. But things like dogs off-leash, I don't know if you have a sense.
We're able to capture it. It's an extra field at the that our folks have to enter, and we didn't really start reminding them to do that until last year. I can pull that up, but it's a very small subset of the violations that are going to have that data attached. So it's probably, to be fair, it might not be enough to actually be representative of the whole.
So most of the off-leash violations are actually residents, property owners.
We can give you anecdotally, but our data points, we don't have enough data points yet to give you an actual accurate.
Okay, that'd be anecdotally to such
I'll look it up real quick.
Anecdotally, just in my personal experience, it's almost dead even between property owners, children, and renters.
I think it's interesting with you asking that question, that my observation is that in NOCO, for example, because that's what I pay attention to mostly, almost none of the houses allow pets in rentals. That's just the homeowner's rule.
Yep.
It's amazing the amount of dogs in rentals.
Well, so there is then that also raises a separate set of issues. What is the role of the town?
That's a good question.
With regard to some of these issues related to short-term rentals, compliance issues, what we think they should abide by and not. What is the role of the broader HOA, KICA or not? Because ultimately, every property owner is a KICA member, and every property owner is supposed to abide by, and over a conversation yesterday, KICA rules and regulations. And KICA can only enforce against its property owners directly, although gate access. And what is the ability, to what extent should we expect, or the community expect, that individual regimes, deal with these issues, set their own rules and regulations? Riverview is one example. My community, we had our own rules and regulations. We enforced that. We imposed fines and did that pretty quickly. And then we changed our covenants, so it's no longer an issue anyway. So I'm just kind of posing these as questions because I don't have.
I'll tell you my experience. Oh, go ahead.
So in the interest of time,
Yep.
we don't have any data. You brought this up as an issue. I'd be supportive of doing some work and coming back to town council with some data. What are the issues? How much are houses being rented? All the things where we need better information on. But to sit here and just us regurgitate, I apologize, our personal experiences or things that are, we all know we should get a better handle on this systematically.
So kind of the same thing with regard to zoning is in terms of an action item. Does it lends itself, is there, given enough complaints that we have, is this worth spending some time on to study, to put together an ad hoc group? And then kind of who will take the lead on that? Is there a council member that's willing to take the lead on that and work with maybe some other community members? Maybe it's a little bit of the kind of planning department or public safety department or public safety committee, and then some other community members, other stakeholders, and coming up with gathering more data and whether there's a recommendation for any changes, whether any adjustment in the caps at all, anything about licensing requirements, anything that we want to either, like for example, my own personal views, my personal view, it's not really a town role to monitor whether towels are over balconies. I would take that out of the code and leave that up to the neighborhood. But there may be other things that are appropriate to put in there that aren't right now.
And the one thing I would add would be the one, I do think to the extent we put more teeth into any regulations we have where it involves the leasing agent, I think that's wholly appropriate.
I agree.
Because you have 2 or 3 different enforcing mechanisms rather than just us being bad.
Yeah, I think that's an opportunity that we have overlooked.
Mr. Permar.
The only thing I would add as you advance this assessment is the vast majority of properties sold in the 70s and 80s was specifically designed for short-term rental.
For what?
Short-term rentals.
Short-term rental.
Yeah, that's how you
Over
got it.
2,700 units were sold between 1976 and 1988. The pace of sales was much more dramatic than it is right now. It was almost exclusively driven to short-term rental. So what leads me to suggest is geographic location and design aspect should at least be some factor in the consideration if you were to make some adjustments. It's not that certain areas like where you're living right
Like
now.
Night Heron Park was built to rent, Income was built to rent.
Sparrow Pond,
Most of the condominiums, they were built to rent.
all those, yeah, Night Heron Park, all those cottages were clearly designed for short-term rental. But amazingly, some odd people decide to live there full-time.
Yeah.
It's very challenging.
And I'm not saying that's a good, bad thing, I'm just saying evolution.
And I acknowledge that that was true, whether what was true then and how things have evolved, whether that wants to continue, whether we want that to continue to be the case going forward is.
Right, and during those early years, quite frankly, there was no thought that single-family homes would be short-term rentals. It wasn't that they wouldn't be, it was like, that's probably not gonna happen. And look what happens. That's where most of the growth is.
Yeah. So, but it has led to us, and again, it may be, everybody can conclude, part of this exercise gathering data, that the number, that there are no issues associated with short-term rentals at all. Either the number, the turnover, compliance or code, and maybe people would be concerned if the number goes from the current 1,350 to 1,500 or 1,600, 35, 36%, maybe that's not an issue. Maybe the data analysis suggests, gee, there are some issues and here are some targeted ways to address those.
I think the issues come up too when there's bad actors. So, again, we have rentals on my street, and it's sort of a non-issue for us because maybe with one exception in cars, Peter parked 10 cars one night. There are no bad actors, so that's also a part of it too.
So a data point that we might also want to look at, I don't know if we can get this information, is what people are charging for the rental compared to similar homes. I don't know if that's available or not. And the example that for the email we got yesterday, that property rents for about half the price of commensurate properties, has been our observation. And I think it's attracting problems because of that.
Well, but I'm not sure what role the town could play.
I'm not sure
That's their property owners. I mean, kind of we're getting into rate regulation or something rate regulation going the other way. It strikes me as
It's probably more so
very
the rental
problematic.
company making sure they bring in good renters.
Well, it's coming back to, are they all bad actors that are coming in because of that price point? So it comes back to if they're all
think
nice
it's more so.
people, then you don't care, right? You don't care what they're charging.
My observation for that property is it is more so that.
Yeah, so but if it was all nice people, you wouldn't care. Are they bad actors or not? And that's what you need to manage, I think.
Well, so if they were all nice people, again, we can all use our personal experiences. I would say that, for example, in one small enclave like Riverview, there were occasionally backers. Putting that aside, what the community ended up completely rejecting is the constant flow and traffic associated with the short-term rentals. There was then 5 homes out of 34. It was kind of a nightmare on Saturdays at least, where you had constant churn in a really small, tight neighborhood. Didn't matter. Now, yes, there were some badly behaved renters in addition to that, but it was just the amount of traffic that impacted kind of the quality of life.
Well, there are some neighborhoods that are really just rentals, like Atlantic Beach.
Yep.
As far as I know.
It's not all, but it's a substantial percentage. And it may be that we kind of revisit. I'm not sure what their real rationale. One of the things would be looked at is, do the previous caps, I mean, somebody decided at a point in time that some caps made sense and some caps didn't, and the caps that were put on certain R2 neighborhoods, but not others.
Yeah, we did. There was a rationale. There was a working group that probably worked on this for months. We had paper maps. We looked at areas, And so there was a reason why, the 20%, there was a reason why certain neighborhoods in R2, because at that time there weren't very, I don't even know if there's any rentals at all, and you two were part of that. And so it was more like it was decided those areas should be preserved. There weren't very many rentals in there, or maybe the look of those areas. And then what Mark said earlier, the team at the time that was led by Councilmember Wyadock, it was also looked at as kind of the historical aspect of kind of the idea that those were going to be designed maybe for rentals. So that's why council did not recommend putting caps on those R3 areas. So there was a lot of discussion. Times have changed. I mean, I think that was put in place almost 5, 6, 7 years ago. I don't remember, but there was some, and we can pull that out, revisit that, kind of get some historical aspect to it, to whoever this work group is, and look to see if we need to make changes to
Can I
that.
ask Saz and Rob a question? So when you get called for what appears to be a short-term rental violation at a property, do you check and see if that property has a short-term rental license to see if they're operating under the radar?
Absolutely. We have to, in order to put the violation in, we have to pull that license and make sure it's active and
That's
current.
good.
And if it's not, we have a feature where we can notify day shift. It's Stephen in the permit section to say, hey, we got a report that these guys are renting. We can do a rental check, or you guys can verify over the phone tomorrow with the rental agency, however you want to do that.
Great, that's good, thanks.
And we also started requiring a contact of the local agent that is within the reach, and yes, that, so I know the guys can actually.
That's probably been the most useful thing so far, is when there is a problem, we have somebody who we call, and
To
the rental,
fix it.
the rental
Yeah.
agencies are attuned to that, where if they don't answer our call, they get 2 tickets for whatever the complaint was, and for not answering.
When you guys ask, when you
works really
guys
well.
check on whether they've got the short-term rental license, do you also get identification of which company they're renting through?
We do.
Yeah.
Well, typically, if we have to do a rental check, we're gonna go to the door during daylight hours, because it's not good to go at night, or after dark, they don't like that. But we'll go during daylight hours and say, hey, we're just doing a business license check, can you show me a copy of your rental agreement? And they'll show me their phone, and we'll take a picture of it. And that shows the fact that they actually paid for it and who they paid. And then the daytime shift follows up on that.
So we could get data that showed potentially which of the companies are in greater violation than others.
Every time.
We have it. Even on this map, you can, well, sorry, it's small, I'll make it a little bigger. So, for example, I don't know.
It's not gonna be small.
No.
But if any homeowner, if anybody wants to know, all this stuff is available on our website. And if, say, Lance, you have a homeowner and they're complaining or they want to know, they can go to the map and click that and they can see all that information
And
on
does
there.
that identify the agent?
So, yes.
Yes, well, the
Well,
local
this one,
contact.
I mean, it's a local contact, but also the applicant. So the applicant, if it's an agency, it's gonna show also the agency name.
Acres Ellis
Yeah.
would be up there.
Correct.
Like this particular property looks like it's managed by the Kiawah Island Golf Resort.
Yeah, it's-
So their local contact, in case there's a problem, we would contact the resort.
So that information is available, and they have access to our database that were all the business, well, both business licenses and short-term rental licenses are issued. So they have access to pretty much all the information that is gathered in the application for the license.
So there's a data source for us.
So the question at this point, is there 1 or 2 council members that would be willing to kind of take this on, whether, again, we establish a kind of a formal working group or task force, or it's a little less formal than that, maybe involving reaching out to the regime council, and maybe having Rob or Saz, provide a little data, and working with a couple of other community members to try to figure out whether there's a problem, gather more data, and whether there are some tweaks or adjustments that should be made to the status quo?
Yeah, I'll work with it.
You're willing to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm willing to be a sidekick on it. I am just being mindful of, I'm taking on several things this week, and I don't want to overextend, but I'm happy to participate.
Well, staff
I'm
would-
happy to be
staff would
like a
help.
sounding
Yeah.
board too.
What's
but
that?
I'm happy to be on the periphery, but
Well, we can't be three, so there can't,
No,
yeah.
but
If
yeah.
you'd rather do it, I'm happy to let more objective.
Well,
My bandwidth is.
if you're
Oh,
kind
but I
of
see
willing
your
to
point.
work, just to kind of start gathering data and like the different kind of component parts. And I don't know if Kika would be interested in part of this, probably not. It's not a Kika-specific thing, although we should identify from a short-term rental regulation standpoint whether there are some regulations that, you know, Kika rules and regulations would already cover or not, as to whether there is unnecessary overlap. That should be probably
Yeah.
part of the assessment.
And I can help you, Russell, because I think Stephen, who is our short-term rental compliance person, would probably definitely work with you on that, but I can
Good.
help you get started.
He was really helpful when we had a lot of questions about rental code stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the one or two, somebody from the regime council would be usefully part of this, because those tend to be where short-term rentals are concentrated, but I would not necessarily limit it to that. Maybe some R2 areas, somebody from an R2 area that's not subject to cap, those that are
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Okay. No other kind of decisions made about any of this right now. But I suspect there seems to be some sentiment that one of the things that's likely to come out of this at the very least is taking a look at our short-term rental business license, and potentially putting some additional teeth into it with regard to holding the property management companies to account for the properties that they are responsible for managing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Okay. That is it. For the morning's agenda. Anything else in kind of this managing growth and development? Oh, well, maybe just spend a couple of minutes. I'm not sure there's anything for us to decide right now, but everybody, I assume, is now familiar with the draft, or it's not a draft, the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding that was entered into between Kika and Kiawah Partners. And less so the ARB piece of it, because that doesn't really fit under, does a little bit under this topic, but the issues related to gate access and potential reconfiguration of the gate. Now, I suspect if that moves forward, it becomes a definitive agreement that's entered into at some point in time, and that there are plans regarding the gate that may or may not involve, well, it would certainly involve the town from a permitting and zoning process, but whether there is more that the town would be involved in, because any reconfiguration might involve town property.
Well, the big thing that we need to inform Kika of was the town looked at doing work at the intersections before, learned there's a maze of utilities at that intersection. And
There's
the
a lot of
price to
infrastructure.
relocate was somewhere like $1 million.
Well, those were to create, initially, the reason that there was a recommendation to have just a right turn lane
Right.
just past the
Right.
entrance to KIRE onto Beachwalker Drive, that would have gone right over where a
Right.
bunch of those.
Right. But-
So that's where the principal issues. There may be others.
But the
Yeah.
point is, if they're looking at putting in a third lane, one would think it's going to somehow melt into that location.
Maybe
And-
not. But that's
But
what-
even
yeah.
whatever roadwork's going to go on, it's going to have an impact to utilities.
But
And it's
as
gonna
I
be expensive.
understand it from what's involved in the agreement itself, is the potential conveyance of property from the partners to Kika, which I'm assuming, given the fact that there's a plan to do the leisure trail back behind the salon and general store, is it would be part of what is now parcel 8 or parcel 10, where the leisure trail currently is, so you could expand there. Whether that third lane would just be on the other side of the intersection, or would the plan would be to have it before the intersection. We don't have any idea yet. This is just a memorandum of understanding.
As I shared with you last week, I think I mentioned before that John and I went over and met with Shannon and Beverly on, mostly it was focused on telecommunications initiatives and issues, but she brought up some infrastructure-ish kinds of things, which this was one of them. And Kika, tell me if I'm saying this wrong, Sherry, is looking to establish a stakeholder group to explore these issues. And because of the infrastructure implications, I'm happy to participate in that if that's how you want to.
Well, that may well be appropriate. Let's see what Kika comes back to us with, and we should, I mean, now a current board member is at least apprised and can apprise the rest of the Kika board, and we would have interactions. Stephanie could reach out to Shannon even involving the work that we had done in looking at the intersection previously. I don't know what's involved in utilities and whether we've looked at on the other side of the intersection where there's a steep slope. I mean, it's actually a steep slope. I don't know quite how you would even, I assume it can be done. There'd have to be a retaining wall put in there at some point if you carved out a lane, because that's a fairly
And recall,
steep.
I told Shannon, I said, I won't speak for Brad, but I think he'd be inclined to participate and support in some way. And she asked about access to data that we would have.
The
I
other
don't know,
thing I
Sherry,
would,
do you have anything to add at this point in time from?
At this point, we're just putting this out to the membership to make sure they support this idea. So we're still in early stages. Yes, the town will be necessarily involved in all steps going forward.
the other thing I would have us all think about is at some point in the future, the resort is going to develop where the old straw market was. And so that kind of corridor, again, should be thought holistically to include what was potentially planned for as a circle right there, whatever that road is that goes to the old straw market. So rather than doing one piece and then doing the next piece, have it thought all the way through, Kiawah Beach.
Well, ideally, you would think about that whole corridor. I mean, certainly, the issues, the traffic related issues that would be attendant to the development of the new hotel property at West Beach have been part of the discussions and the need for some, potential, which is, there's already been a plan developed for a roundabout there. But that,
I'm just saying we should keep the resort as part of this working group.
Well,
Sure.
that makes sense. The question, I don't know, if you have a third lane there, at some point, and you're having a roundabout, you're taking land to create the roundabout. I don't know what it means for the resort in terms of hole number 2. At some point in time, some reconfiguration, but.
Yeah. One of the things that Shannon said would be part of the discussion also, I asked her about, potential of an off-site pass office, which would be a Kika's decision, but there may be a municipality role if they decide to pursue that. So that could be on the table.
And we'd have to be involved outside of the first gate in terms of the road construction and road.
That's right.
Well, this afternoon, one of the topics we're going to talk about is, whether we want to figure out how to operationalize the concept of Kiawah Island Alliance. And this is actually one of the types of topics that would be kind of top of the agenda for that type of structure. Okay. So yes, lunch is ready. We'll break now, and 30 minutes or so. We'll maybe start at 12:45.